Morning, everyone. So Christopher Marlowe, as I've written here, not just a poet. After a lazy lunch with friends on the 30th of May, 1593, the playwright Christopher Marlowe was killed in Deptford, London. An argument about the food bill had got out of hand, and one of his friends fatally stabbed him in the eye. You may be aware of the idea of the rock and roll wild men of the 20th century, people like Jerry Lee Lewis, who loved drugs and guns, which is a bad combination, and accidentally shot his bassist and married his 13-year-old cousin. You can see him in the top right, playing the piano with his shoe. Keith Moon, bottom left, drummer of the legendary rock band The Who, put explosives in his bandmates' instruments and vandalized hotel rooms. Keith Richards, on the right of the Rolling Stones, was arrested for possession of heroin, cannabis, a rifle, a pistol, and ammunition for both, and even snorted his dead father's ashes. And more recently, Amy Winehouse, who died very young, and grime stars have been jailed for gun and drug offences and domestic violence. You may have also heard of the phrase live fast, die young, and the long list of artists who have died in their 20s, in particular age 27, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse again, Jim Morrison and others. But this is nothing in comparison to the original wild man of the arts, the original rock and roll monster, Christopher Marlowe. Marlowe was a contemporary of Shakespeare. His most famous play is Dr. Faustus, the story of a man who sells his soul to the devil. He was renowned for his poetry and wrote one of the finest pastoral lyrics, so good that someone published it after his death, thinking it was by Shakespeare. Marlowe was a contemporary of Shakespeare, as I've said. And when Marlowe died, people recalled his mighty line and that he had in him those brave translunary things that the first poets had. His raptures were all air and fire. He is my favourite writer, but not just because of his art. His life is also fascinating and extraordinary and shrouded in mystery. Even his death is not quite what it seemed. So this is what we know. He was born in Canterbury in 1564 to a family with little money. He gained a scholarship to King's Canterbury School, still a well-known independent school seen here in this slide. He must have been very clever. And he got a scholarship to Cambridge and went up to Corpus Christi College in 1580. At some stage between 1585 and 1587, Marlowe had come to the attention of the university authorities. He'd already got his bachelor's degree and was working for his master's. But he hadn't been doing very much work. He'd been involved in dubious politics and had not really been spending much time in Cambridge. So you might think that this is not very strange for a student, perhaps. But was he a Catholic subversive, about to defect to Reims in France? Was he a traitor? When the university authorities were about to discipline Marlowe, he received support from a very strange place. The advisors to Queen Elizabeth, the Privy Council, wrote on Marlowe's behalf, saying that he had been involved in matters touching the benefit of his country. He was perhaps a spy, and probably under the protection of the great Elizabethan spy master, Sir Francis Walsingham. Because, you see, he was a poor boy living in Canterbury. He had no other connections to nobility, so why on earth would the Privy Council intervene on his behalf? His first play, Tamerlane the Great, was a huge success in 1587, so much so that Tamerlane too was quickly produced later in the year, rather like sequels are produced now. This play, however, had an unfortunate accident, and it might remind you of some of our rock and roll mad people. A musket was going to be used in a scene, but it was accidentally loaded and fired. It killed a pregnant woman and a child in the audience. Like much of Marlowe's life, we don't really know when his great play Dr. Faustus was written. The first recording of its performance was after Marlowe had died. Scholars think it was written in the year of the Spanish Armada, 1588. It was also a great success and a completely new form of tragedy in the English language. In many ways, it is a modern tragedy, but also looks back to medieval morality plays. Faustus sells his soul to the devil for 24 years of pleasure, power, and debauchery. Interestingly, God seems unwilling or unable to help Faustus save himself. And this brings us to another controversy surrounding Marlowe. Was he an atheist? Atheism in Elizabethan England was punishable with death. In the final years of his life, he was betrayed by friends and denounced by his enemies. But first, he has some fighting to do. In 1589, he was involved in a fight where he killed William Bradley. It was a late summer's day in Shoreditch, East London, and he killed Bradley with a sword and dagger. He was sent to Newgate prison, but only spent 12 days there, a remarkably short period of time, and he was found to have acted in self-defense. And again, questions are raised about this short period of time in prison. Was he released early because of his work for the spymaster Walsingham? He then vanishes from the record between 1590 and 1592, having written The Jew of Malta. He appears arrested in the Netherlands for forging coins, another offence that was considered to be treason. He was sent back to England. A spy called Baines informed on Marlowe, but Marlowe was released after a few weeks, again, suggesting that he was perhaps working for the state. Was he trying to infiltrate English Catholic rebels on the continent? At this time, there were numerous plots to kill Elizabeth and restore England to Roman Catholicism. Things were now getting more troublesome for Marlowe. A few weeks after his release for coining, in May, he fought a police constable in a beadle and was bound over to keep the peace and fined. In September, he fought a tailor in Canterbury who alleged Marlowe had assaulted him with staff and dagger. This never proceeded to court because it seems he had been fighting a friend. Clearly, Marlowe was someone who was hot-tempered and dangerous. Things were escalating, rather like one of his plays, towards a bloody end. Alongside his fighting, there was another equally dangerous and more sinister problem. People were beginning to denounce Marlowe for atheism and homosexuality. Robert Greene, who called Shakespeare an upstart crow, also said that Marlowe claimed there was no God. Robert Baines, the spy who had informed on Marlowe's forging activities, claimed Marlowe had 19 dangerous beliefs. Beliefs like Christ was a bastard and his mother dishonest, or all they that love not tobacco and boys were fools, or that Jesus and John the Baptist were homosexual lovers, and that religion was to keep men in awe. Another spy, Richard Chumley, said he was part of an atheist cult run by Sir Walter Raleigh and knew more sound reasons for atheism than any divine in England, and that he had associated with a conjurer, someone involved in black magic. Marlowe's rooms were raided, and his friend, the playwright Thomas Kidd, was arrested and tortured. Kidd, under torture, claimed Marlowe was a blasphemer. It's difficult to know if this was an orchestrated campaign, but there are lots of spies involved. Was Marlowe an atheist? Was he hanging out with Raleigh and the Wizard Earl? Was he spying on them? Why was he in so many fights? In 1593, he was told to report to the Privy Council. Effectively, he was under open arrest and not allowed to move freely. You will remember the Privy Council stepped in to defend him when he was at Cambridge. So, we return to the day of his death, stabbed by his friends after an argument over the lunch bill. But let's have a look at his friends, because everything is not quite as straightforward as you might think. He was killed by Ingram Frizzer, a business associate of the spymaster Walsingham. Nicholas Skeers was also there. He was a con man, swindler, yep, and you've guessed it, a spy for Walsingham, and worked for the Earl of Essex, a very powerful noble. Robert Poley was also there. Oddly, he was also a Walsingham spy and had been in the Netherlands. Why were all these spies present at his death? Was it premeditated murder? Was it an argument that got out of hand, as is alleged? Allegedly, Marlowe got angry and dived for Frizzer's dagger after they'd had dinner and Marlowe was lying down on a bed. Surely 3 dangerous men could peacefully subdue one man. Anyway, there is one more theory, and I'm not sure whether I believe it or not. I think it's fanciful, but fun. This theory says that Marlowe was never actually killed, that his death was faked to allow him to avoid punishment for the allegations of atheism, black magic, and homosexuality. Was he on government service in the last years of his life? Did the government intervene to save him? Did he live quietly somewhere else, continuing his spying work? Well, we will never know. So that's the life of Christopher Marlowe.